All right, and we're live. Welcome
Okay.
everybody to the Audio Programmer podcast. This is episode 32, building your first audio product, and we have a special guest here, Matt Robinson. So he was recently a client of ours at our audio programmer agency, and he had this awesome suggestion of that he thought that it would be valuable to have a discussion on what that experience is like for other people that may be looking to build audio products. And his recent vision has come to a reality, and it's just released on the Traction Marketplace. It's called StageBox. And maybe one way that we could kick things off, Matt, is just by talking about how StageBox, what the vision for that actually was.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's great to chat with you, Josh. So I work primarily as a musical director for artists and live bands, and that role kind of changes quite a bit depending on exactly who the artist is. But one of the things that I regularly have to do and have been doing is building keyboard rigs that are based around computers. So a lot of people, a lot of music production now is made with software instruments in the studio, and so when people take that music out to a live show, they quite often want to or need to have a way to play back those software instruments in a live context. And there's a few things on the market that do that, like notably Apple's Main Stage is a very sort of big hitter in that field. There's another one called Gig Performer. There's a few ways to do it. But the main problem that I had with all of those current solutions is that quite often as a musical director, particularly if I'm working remotely, I'll put together a rig and then I basically send that rig out to a user, out to a keyboard player, and then they're basically navigating through the presets to play all these sounds. Um, and if you send a computer with a rig, a piece of software on it to somebody that maybe isn't totally confident with that software, and then they suddenly want to change something or move things around, I've quite often run into this problem where I'm like, oh, well, now it's kind of an issue because this is a really complex piece of software that I've sent to you, and it works great, but it's really difficult to explain to you what to do with it now. So the main concept behind StageBox was to come up with a plugin host that what I hope is most people could kind of look at the UI and go, oh, right, I see what's going on. There's my list of songs. This is my instrument plugin. That's where my effects are going. And not really have to interact with it any more than just looking at the UI and kind of going, oh, I get it. Cool. And also laying it out such a way that if explanation was needed, I can just get on the phone with somebody and say, oh, you just need to move that song there and press that button there. So in the background, there's some sort of pretty like complicated audio stuff going on that just makes it do the thing that it does. But the real concept behind it was to try and make something that was broadly straightforward to use, didn't really take much setup time to get going. Um, and so I started messing around with, making some UIs and showing it to a few people. And then thought, oh, I think I should do this. Um, but coming from a background of like zero coding experience or software development in general, the next problem was, okay, how do I actually turn this idea into reality? Which is where you guys come in.
Mm. And did you consult anybody for those designs, those initial sketches that you had, or was this just something that you formed from intuition?
This was something I just formed from intuition. I guess, yeah, like the intuition of having used similar software for the last kind of 20 odd years, right? And there are certain kind of design protocols where you think, okay, well, this is broadly how people do this. And so sometimes you want to follow those rules. And then sometimes you think, yeah, well, that's a daft way of doing it. It would be much more simple if this was here and there was a line that went there, kind of thing. Um, yeah, I literally just started sketching ideas, did a few iterations, showed them to a few people, like people in the industry that I know, and got some feedback. And then I was speaking to a friend of mine that works in software development, but totally not in the music field, and he introduced me to Figma, which is a package that lets you basically build your UI in a visually working way. So I guess it's kind of like a kind of web design program in a way, in that you create buttons and frames and fields, but you can make it so that the software, the UI that you've made, will broadly behave in the way that it would actually behave once it's been built. Um, so that was the point where I could actually put this idea in front of other people other than myself and say, okay, if this UI was in front of you, how would you expect to do the following things? And then they can actually interact with this UI. So yeah, like the original concept of it was just me messing around with ideas. Um, but then as soon as you put those ideas in front of three or four people that you know work in that field, or not even necessarily work in that field, just have some experience of using things like that, then you very quickly go, oh yeah, no, of course it makes much more sense if this is over here and that's over there.
Yeah.
um yeah, so I think that was kind of the UI consultation at that early stage, I guess.
Yeah. And one thing that I love is that there are companies that have experts who are dedicated to this user experience, user
Totally.
interface design. And one thing that I love is that I think sometimes we get, as an industry, we get a little bit outside of ourselves in terms of we, I think that we try to make things so scientific and that we have a habit of maybe sometimes putting intuition to the side and saying, well, this is what our user research says. And rather than just going with gut feeling. And sometimes I find that it's really the gut feeling that you really need to follow, especially for somebody like yourself who has had so much experience.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting topic all of itself. I mean, I like my main kind of creative process is in creating music. And I guess from that point of view, it's very much all about your instinct and your own ideas, and you're almost like proactively ignoring what the market research says, because you want to create something new and interesting. So, you know, I, and for better or worse, that's the kind of view I took with the software development. Um, Now, the interesting thing is that, 9 months later, once I get to a point where it's out, there are certain aspects of that where I'm thinking, yeah, I really should have, asked a few more people about that. But fundamentally, I'm really happy with the fact that I've put a product out there that is effectively the product that I would want to see. And I think that's a really healthy starting point. Now, it may develop into something different where you're like, oh, okay, well, there's a bunch of users that are going to find these particular features really useful, that are things that I personally wouldn't have a use for, but there's a bunch of people that want them. So let's work out how to build that in there. Um, but I've very much like fallen back on the fact, just from from the point where I started making a UI to the point where I started actually seeing builds come through and thinking, okay, how should this be? I was very much just going on the sort of instinct of what I thought was a useful feature set and what I thought was a good way to do things. And I think that comes from like my music background, because I don't really know how else to make something. I kind of I yeah. But yeah, like I say, that can be a blessing and a curse.
Right. It's like people who go to school to learn art versus people who just do art
Totally.
as
And
an
I did a university course in sound recording and kind of majored in music performance. And it was an awesome experience and I learned a ton of stuff. But I definitely feel like part of the next sort of decade after that was convincing myself to unlearn some of those processes. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
that's the basis that I was kind of working on.
Yeah. I had a similar experience in that when I went to university from 2015 to 2018 to learn how to do this, I came from a performance background as a performing DJ,
Uh-huh.
scratching and doing DJ competitions and music, and also some music production. Uh, and that it was very interesting to me how stepping from that environment and going really off of intuition and what just felt right and what felt in the groove to, okay, now I need to write a paper about DJing. And there was this real scholarly, analytical way that things were broken down. And it was very difficult for me to adjust to that because I felt like they just did it because it felt right. They didn't do it because they were looking at the gaps between when they were doing, where they were putting the drums or whatever. It's just you're going off of feeling, right? And I think that, like I said, that user experience and user interfaces that we tend to, especially when we're talking to software developers and they can do just about anything that you can imagine, that we tend to want to just jam everything in there. And I love that. One thing that I love about StageBox is that you wanted to simplify the concept rather than packing in a bunch of features that the other options on the market didn't have. You thought, well, let's strip it back because we need to make it easier for the performers to be able to just come in, lock in their sound, and get going quickly. So I find that that's very interesting. I think in general we make our interfaces too complex.
Yeah, totally. And I have a similar sort of methodology with, as you can see, I've got quite a few like synths and keyboards around me. And you know, I love having one synth that does one thing. And this is kind of a luxury privileged position to be in, but I've been collecting these things for like 25 years now. But one synth that does one thing well and does it simply is super valuable. And definitely is like part of a bigger creative process. I definitely feel like having a few tools that do simple things that you understand is a real uh it really helps your creativity, I think, rather than getting bogged down in options. Option
Yeah.
paralysis is a real thing.
It is a real thing. I recently started going back to making music again and just experimenting, trying to do it for fun. And I love the sound of the 80s. So things like, the Lindrum, any Jupiter type sounds, Roland, of course, the 808, 909, um, sounds like that. And one thing that I found was that in that production process, that it was very difficult because some of the tools that I was trying to use, like Serum 2 and just using some of the drums from the DAW, that I felt like I was just lost. Like I know the sounds in my mind that I want, but I can't get it onto the screen. And I really think that there's so much more work that we can do in terms of being able to get from where I don't know that text prompts is necessarily the way to go there, but I feel like there's a part missing there in terms of I don't know if it's that DAWs should start making suggestions towards us in terms of like helping us to get in a direction quicker or something. And so I think that there's something that's missing there in that music creation process that allows us just to get off the ground. Otherwise, we get we get locked in with just cheap sounding drums, synth sounds that aren't the ones that we would normally associate with the time period that we're trying to recreate. And it's there's a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, as an industry in terms of how we interface with the computer and music creation.
Totally. I, I at the risk of kind of hijacking what we're meant to be talking about, I do think that like uh, digital instrument design is something that has only really existed in what the last 20 odd years, maybe. Um, but like the violin's been around for hundreds of years, and it took quite a long time to get it to the point where it turned into this beautiful, wonderful, expressive instrument, which is fundamentally really simple. You've got not many like inputs to it, but like how many different sounds can you get out of it? And I've been fascinated for a long time with like digital instrument design and trying to get something to a point where it's like, okay, I've got the minimum number of inputs that I need to really kind of become a virtuoso with, but those minimum number of inputs can give me the maximum number of outputs, which and it feels like a lot of design, a lot of uh UI designs, but also like physical digital instrument designs are almost the opposite of that, where it's like, okay, well, I've got a interface with 65 pots on it, which is great, and in its own thing. I'm not suggesting that we should ditch that, but it's a very different methodology, you know. I'm really fascinated by things like the Osmos, which is the um, product by Expressive E, which is like a polyphonic aftertouch multi-dimensional controller thing. Um, it's really fascinating, and products like that for me really get to the core of that idea, where it's like, you know, on the Osmos you can press a key down, but you can also move it from side to side, and you can move your finger forwards and backwards. But you've basically only really got one input, which is what your one finger is doing. But that one finger can do a whole ton of different things, and that I find like really exciting for development going forward. And like you say, I feel like having elements of that built into software user interfaces could be super interesting. Um, I guess like the simple version of that is just like an XY pad where you can map multiple parameters, but only be dragging around an XY pad. That's a similar idea. I think those kind of things are really awesome. And like you say, I think it's an area that's just going to get more and more exciting as people develop these things.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm loving this digression, by the way, and some of the people in the chat are as well. So this is really cool. Uh, so going to your comparison of the Osmos versus a violin, I think that that's really interesting because when you look at a violin, yes, there are only a certain number of inputs, but the way that you can what's the technical term? Bow the string?
Yeah,
Is it the right term? Bow the
yeah,
string. And you can pluck the string, right? You can. There are so many different things, and one thing that I love is that the way that you interact with that instrument really comes down to your creativity as a human, right?
totally.
That that you can really think outside the box and try a lot of different things. And whereas when we're making computer music, that we really only, unless we have controllers, we really only have the X, Y, and down of the mouse pad. That and that limits us. It limits the ways that we could do that. But I still think, despite that, I still think that there are there's more out there to be seen, right? Which is that we could probably get velocity from the mouse in terms of like how fast you're moving your finger from one position to the other. There was a really interesting set of synthesizers or sound creation tools, should I call them, from a company based in Japan called Sugi. So they do game audio design, and they could do things like bullet sounds, where what you do is you actually can you have an XY interface, and what you can do is you can draw on it. So you could draw like a circle, or you can draw a line, and the way that you draw it determines the sound, the output of the sound.
Yeah,
And I
cool.
think there's something very interesting about it. If you did it slow, maybe it would be a lower sound. If you did it really quickly, it'd be
Yeah, yeah,
a high ricochet type of sound.
yeah.
And
Very cool.
they've done that for I think they've done several. So they've done one, I think, for gunshots. Everybody loves video game gunshots, I guess.
Yeah,
Car motors as well, where you can you can describe how the engine revs up. I think there aren't enough people that are diving into that and going full force into that realm, and I would really love to see more products like that that really go to get your expression of
yeah,
what
yeah,
you want to happen, because you know in your mind and in your heart how you feel, right? But you don't, but instead you're twiddling around parameters rather than just saying, I just want that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
totally. And maybe that is an area where AI is gonna like come to the fore, because it feels like it's this sort of very complex series of inputs and feedback loops. Um, that are more than just like a linear, this parameter does this and this parameter does this. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't really know what I'm talking about in that respect, but but
Yeah.
the other area that I think is super interesting, which I don't think has been I don't think it's really been sort of utilized at all, as far as I can tell, is haptic feedback in performance. So, any acoustic instrument is going to actually vibrate because that's how it makes it sound, and quite a big part of the player response is actually feeling those vibrations of a violin, or you hit the low note on a 9 foot grand piano, you're going to feel that. Um, and I can't really think of any digital instruments that use haptic feedback. Um, but I've always thought that would be super interesting. Uh, um, there's this I can't remember what it's called. There's this kind of DIY device. It's called something like the Nightmare Machine, and it was made by this company to make like weird sounds for horror films. But it's basically like this plywood box, and it's got some springs on it that you can twang, and a string that you can bow, and all these different things that basically wobble. And it's got a bunch of little pickup mics on it, and you record the output. But when you play it, it's only this little box, but you get feedback from what you're doing because you can feel it come back to you. And I think that's a huge part of like the kind of chasm between digital electronic instruments and yeah, I should say electronic instruments rather than digital instruments, but electronic instruments versus acoustic instruments is you don't really get that sense of haptic feedback. Um, and I think that would also be a super interesting thing to experiment with.
That's really interesting. One thing that I've seen some experiments into has been using video game controllers for music
Oh,
creation
yeah,
as
right,
music
right, right.
creation tools. And I recently spoke about this with I think in our last podcast, which was a little bit about AI and AI as interfaces, but we we were discussing how beneficial that it seems to look to accessibility in the way that and accessibility tools and the way that we can convey feeling and the way that we can convey feedback as a way that I think that we should go in terms of the direction that we need to go in terms of interfaces because like you were saying it's about getting that response right and it's about being able to um, feel like you're interacting with the interface rather than it feeling like it's a distance away from you
Mhm.
and that you're on one side because when you're a professional instrumentalist or a professional in anything, you feel like you're one with the interface, right? With the keyboard, with the piano. And I think that's why people love those physical interfaces so much is because they
Yeah,
feel like they can just their hands can just go there
yeah,
and do the thing and it's not thinking, it's just feeling.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I
And
think
I don't want to say that that doesn't exist in the electronic realm, but I think that also kind of comes back to this idea of simplicity. I think people that are able to do that can do it because they've got 15 years worth of muscle memory on an MS-20 or Pioneer DJ mixer or whatever it is.
mm,
But I think you can only get that sense of freedom if you've got the muscle memory of that interface that you've learnt. And then the more different interfaces you introduce into your kind of creative sphere, the more difficult it becomes to kind of get that muscle memory with that one instrument.
right,
Yeah,
right.
it's a
And
bit
that's one of the
paradoxical.
things that I like bringing it back to StageBox. I like one thing that I like about StageBox is that when you first see the interface, there's not a lot that you can do with it other than add an instrument, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
and I really like that. It's almost like the iPhone when the iPhone first came out had one button, and what's the first thing you want to do? You want to press the button,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
see what it does.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love the simplicity of it. I actually love that it's not as in terms of the interface that it's not it doesn't have as many extra things going on in it as let's say main stage or some of the other options that are out there on the market.
Yeah, and it's like it's deliberately straightforward, but hopefully not at the expense of being like functionally straightforward. Um, and in that sort of design process, you have to think, okay, well, which bits am I gonna ditch here, you know? And hopefully you can do it, or hopefully we have done it in such a way where you're not really ditching anything. But there's always going to be cases where somebody's going to be like, oh, but I really want to have this routing here, and well, sorry, you can't. You know, but hopefully for the vast majority of people, and this is where hopefully my kind of experience working in the live music field kind of comes into it, is that in my experience this is what most people are going to find useful, and these are the kind of parameters that you're going to want on your front page. This is a routing system that's going to work for like 95% of people, I hope. And obviously that's not going to be everyone, but if you're trying to create a simple interface, I think it's very, it's you can't have it work for everyone all the time, but then you hope that the people that it does work for are going to really appreciate the fact that it's straightforward, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. I think that it takes so much courage to step back and say, hold on a second, that I don't need this product to be for absolutely everybody, because if you do, then you wind up with a main stage, right? And I think that that is what Apple probably aimed to do, was to say, well, we need this to fit a lot of different use cases, a lot of general purpose use case. That's why I think DAWs are such a challenge as well, because they really have to fit a lot of different types of workflows. You don't
Oh
have
yeah.
any ideas of, you're not very informed in terms of, well, is the person going to be taking some audio files and moving them into the timeline, or are they going to be trying to trigger some MIDI? I mean, you really have to be ready for anything, and I think that that is so challenging.
It's so difficult, and one of the things that this process with StageBox has really given me an appreciation for is, I guess, like in the big scheme of software, StageBox is relatively straightforward, compared to say Apple's Logic Pro, and yet even with something like StageBox, there are so many things that happened along the way where I was like, man, I'd never thought of that, and how do we solve this one? How do you do that? And then you look at something like Logic Pro that is basically, trying to cover all the bases of like a Pro Tool style multi-track recorder and an Ableton style clip based creative tool and a Cubase style MIDI editor. And they're trying to do all of these things. And it's like, man, it's so immensely complex. Um, but I think Logic's a great example because, and I've used Logic for, as soon as I started in the audio industry, I've been using various versions of Logic. Um, and there's like it feels like there's this whole paradigm of Logic use that I just don't understand, and I don't really want to know because I'm using it this way, and that's the way I've always used it, and that's what I'm always going to do. And so, and I guess like what, 2 or 3 versions ago, they kind of introduced this whole sort of Ableton way of doing things into Logic, and I'm just not interested. And I think that's okay. Like I love that they've developed and put that in there, but it's like it's pretty incredible that they've made something that I can use one way and so somebody else can use a totally different way. Um, but I think in a way the issue with that is that when you then get a new user and you're like, okay, how do you start using Logic? Well, I don't know. I mean, you could start using it this way, or you could start using it that way, or you could start using it this. And I'm not totally sure that's a good thing. I mean, I'm a total Apple fanboy. I my career is based on using Logic, so I'm not dissing Logic, but I do think it's a really interesting kind of design thought experiment to go, okay, well, if you're actually starting something from scratch, is it a good idea to have users be able to use it in like 3 completely different ways? I don't know. But that was very much the thing with StageBox, is that I'm very much going for this is how it's going to work. This is how you use it. And for users for whom that's a good thing, it's going to be really good. And there's obviously going to be some people that that's not going to be good for, and I think that's okay because then there are other products that are suited to their needs. But I'm I'm kind of much more interested in products that do one particular thing in one particular way, and that will be really good for a certain subset of users than a product that's going to try and do everything for everyone, you know?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about those users. Who did you have in mind when you were thinking of the concept for StageBox?
Um, Primarily myself, I got to be honest. It's like I mean this is kind of looping back a little to what we were talking about initially, but um, a lot of the design criteria were like, okay, well, what if I open up a laptop and want to make a set list out of sounds? How do I want it to behave? So that's a big part of it. But to be more sort of sensible about it, I think it's really aimed at people that maybe are starting to do shows and want to integrate software instruments into their shows, and they haven't done it before. And so looking at something like Mainstage or Gig Performer or Cantabile, which is another Windows-based one, um, I think they're really daunting programs to get your head round if all you want to do is have a couple of instances of Keyscape and play your gig, you know? Um, so I so I think that's kind of the the main user that I'm trying to attract with this is people who've maybe been put off by the current solutions being slightly too complicated for where they're at in their process right now. And then maybe once they get to a point where you're like, oh yeah, but there's that thing in Gig Performer where I can do this and I can't do that in StageBox. And that's great. Then it's like, okay, well now you need to sort of migrate onto a slightly more elaborate piece of software. That being said, I have built a bunch of things into StageBox that I think would definitely fall under like the professional category. Um, and in a lot of the and I hate using the word professional because like what does that mean? But like you know, people touring musicians that are out playing shows to larger numbers of people, I guess let's say that. Um for a lot of the people that I work with that are in that category, then Stagebox would also definitely work for them. So I don't want to kind of pitch it as as a sort of product for beginners in terms of its functionality. But I think it's a product that will cater for the needs of people that are doing this kind of thing for the first time, and will also take them quite a way down the road of, you know, it will be a while before you outgrow this software, you know?
I like that. So it's more that you have if you had a Venn diagram of performers that were setting up their rig on stage, you want to cover a lot of that area of the foundational pieces of that. And then when there may be some edge cases that are more for um, advanced power users that you say, okay, well, maybe that could be something for later, but for now, we're going to just keep it the building blocks, meat and potatoes, so to speak, of
Totally.
what people would typically look for in
Yeah.
terms of live performance.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So how did you find the audio programmer initially? I don't know if I ever
Like,
asked the
do you
question.
mean like, you know, how I knew you existed?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, yeah, you know what? I'm to be honest with you, I'm struggling to remember. I think it might have just been Googling.
Mm.
Um, I think that I think that I kind of came up with this idea and I had this crazy idea, and this was, you know, going back to like the beginning of COVID times, and I thought, oh, I'll just learn how to code. You know, might take a few years, and then I actually started doing a couple of like online courses of different kinds of coding, and very quickly realized that that was a very futile exercise to start on. It was, you know, kind of like deciding that you want to learn to play the piano, but with a kind of 2 year deadline of giving a concert hall recital. You know, it's just not really going to happen. So I started learning a bit, but it very quickly became apparent that that wasn't really my skill set, and so I needed to work with people that could actually do the coding side of things for me. So I think just in my kind of searching of how people built plugins, I think I came across Juice and that whole side of things. Um, and then yeah, I think I just came across it via like searching, reading a few forums and searching.
Mhm.
Um, and then I reached out to you and said, "Oh, here's this project that I'd like to do. Um, I'd love to chat about it." And then I think you got back in touch with me and suggested that I speak to somebody like a kind of like third party kind of like onboarding person to sort of ascertain, well, what stage of the process are you at? Have you literally got an idea in your head, or have you started thinking about what this might look like in reality, and what the build might actually look like? um and at that point I'd actually already spoken to a few people that were not necessarily like associated with the audio programmer, but just software developers in the music and audio field, um, that I'd had some sort of connection with like over the years, and I was just sort of sounding them out and saying, "I've got this idea for a product. Like, convince me not to do it, or put me in touch with people that are going to be able to help me." So
Yeah.
once I started talking to you, I think I'd already spoken to a few people to get a hopefully get like a bit of a reality check as to what I was getting myself into. Um,
Mm, interesting. One question that I've always wanted to ask people who become clients or prospective clients of ours, or that I think about a lot, is what your biggest questions were in terms of when you initially approached us or when you initially started approaching uh, developers with this idea. What were the biggest questions in your mind?
I think the two biggest questions, I guess, were like, how in reality is this going to work from a client point of view with like zero knowledge of doing anything like this before, and how much is it going to cost?
Right.
And those two things are like, they go on this wiggly path because one very much depends on the other. Um, but I guess like initially it was very much about, once I'd spoken to a few people and they were saying, "Oh, no, I think that's a decent idea. You should definitely speak to some more people about how you might follow through with that." Um, so when I started speaking with you, um, I think I already had like a broad, like a half working Figma UI that kind of explained what I was trying to go for, and I had what I thought at the time was a pretty comprehensive Miro like ideas board with all these different things of like, okay, I want it to behave a little bit like this and have this idea from this. I don't want it to do these things. These are the features that, all these kind of things mapped out, but not really in any way that was probably useful to actually start making something.
Mm,
Um, and that's where the conversations with you guys really started to formulate it into an idea. um because I think once I'd presented you with this kind of like slightly ethereal cloud based, here are all the ideas that I'd love to work on, then you start putting that in the language of what kind of developer or developers would I need to work with in order to translate this into this piece of software that I can go and buy now. So that process was kind of the biggest question mark for me, because I think I was kind of thinking, okay, well, can you just give me like a big list of checkboxes that I need to do to present that to a developer and then them go and build it? And I think in my mind, that's how I sort of thought it might work. It was like, oh, well, if you have a bunch of user stories like this and you draw a bunch of diagrams like this, then somebody can just go and build it, and it will exist in a few months' time. Um, and in reality, that's just like not how it works at all. It's, or at least in my case, it was very much more a sort of exploration process of, okay, well, here are all these ideas you've got, but once we start building those ideas, you might find that this idea here wasn't such a great idea. Or you start building it and it's like, oh, well, these three things over here we can actually combine into this one thing here, just because of the way that we've developed it and things that we've learned along the way. Um, so yeah, I think those were the kind of biggest questions for me. And then as we actually started getting into it, the questions it was kind of more that same that same question in a way. And it's like, okay, well, how much detail do we want to have up front, and how much are we going to discover along the way? I think that was a really big part of the learning process for me. Um, just trying to understand that, yeah, we could spend a month before anyone starts doing ones and zeros, just making our Miro board wonderful and making the Figma UI so that it does absolutely everything that this app is going to do. And then we'll present that to some people in the market and we'll get some feedback on it. And then we'll start doing, actually building something. And I guess if you do that, you're spending this upfront time and money to get to a point where you kind of think it's bulletproof. And it's like, yeah, we just need to go and build this and it will all be great. Um, or you can just start building. And the route to the end product will probably be less efficient than it might have been, but you've actually spent the same amount of time and money to get to the end product. Um, and I think in my experience of doing StageBox, it was kind of a bit of both those things. Like I felt like I had a pretty solid, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do at the beginning. And then of course it turns out that you start building it and you're like, oh, well, maybe I wasn't quite so correct about all these assumptions that I was making. Um, so I think that was a really interesting part of the process for me, is just to kind of understand that there's different ways to get to the end point, and one way is not necessarily better than the other. And I think a lot of that will depend on the kind of I guess like the thought process of the client and how the client is able to express their ideas. And a lot of that will come down to just not being able to predict the future. It's like, well, yeah, once we start making this, you might find that having that send knob over there is just a daft place to put it. Um, yeah, so I'm now I've slightly got sidetracked, but
No, I think you're right on target with that. And I think that what you came to us with initially was really quite fleshed out in terms of what we normally see.
right.
And the fact that you had a board, a list of features, some type of basic design, I think that those were very informative in terms of trying to box that into some type of specification. And uh, over the years, I think that we've tried all different types of approaches, and it's something that we see within the larger companies as well, trying to figure out, okay, is it about just putting our head down and just bashing something out and getting to the end and putting it out, or is it about doing quick iterations and getting a whole bunch of feedback along the way? And it's definitely a challenge, and I don't know that there's one way that checks all the boxes. I really come into this knowing that there's going to be a little bit of like there needs to be a little bit of give and a little bit of back and forth conversation, some iteration, and that from us, one of the biggest things that we check with when it comes to the clients that we choose to work with is how workable is that client, how and that was one of the things that I really appreciated about uh what the how you approach things was that you had come in prepared, you were ready, you knew the things that you wanted, you knew the things that you didn't want. You had a great you had a great intuition for what was possible and what wasn't possible. And that for us is very comforting because these types of projects become like partnerships. They become
Yeah.
collaborations where you're taking almost like a what they would call a product owner or product designer type of role, and you're giving us the feedback in terms of what you would like to see, and we need to make sure that that relationship is professional and that it's strong and that it's collaborative and that it's always positive in spirit. So I really appreciated that. Uh, and another thing that becomes that is a challenge that we we have tried different types of approaches with this. has been the way that we handle things like discovery processes. Like you said, when you, when you or when a client comes to us with a list of a specification and designs, um, there are always open questions that come with that that can really ch completely change the scope of what the product is.
Yeah.
For instance, you could say preset menu. Now, preset menu can just mean a list of presets. It could mean favorites. It can mean saving user presets. Okay, what happens if the user wants to override a factory preset? There are all these different inroads, and there are so many of those things that happen that can really widen or narrow down the scope. And a lot of those initial conversations are just okay. As we have those conversations, are we going to be able to collaborate on that? And is the client going to understand that, hey, if we need to build out a fully fledged type of preset menu that has all the bells and whistles and everything, it's going to cost X, it's going to cost X amount to build out. Is the client going to understand that?
Yeah.
Uh,
Totally.
and another point that I'll say quickly is that audio software is so tricky. It's so bespoke and it's so custom. And I think that sometimes I'm a little bit envious of web agencies and web designers because there are so many givens and so many assumptions that you can develop a foundation. And so there have been many times where I've thought about this thing, like you said, like a menu, almost like a restaurant, right? Where you could just check in items
Yeah.
and and that you could just throw it into this black box and then out on the other side comes a product. But I think there are so many variables that it's too tricky to do. It's very bespoke, and I think because of that, I feel you know quite comfortable that we're not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon because it
What
is so creative, right?
That's a really interesting. I was, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, oh, I should ask what you think about the whole AI thing. But just before we come to that, I just want to loop back to something else you said. So I think like what you were mentioning about like the preset menu, I think that's super interesting. Because to go back to what I was saying about like how I use Logic Pro, I have this one way of doing things that I've always done, and it works great for me. And so it's very easy to make the assumption that that's how you do it, and everyone is going to do it that way, right? And even like Logic Pro has got like at least three different ways to save a channel strip. And some people are like, oh, but this way sucks, and I could never work like that, but this way is great. And I might feel the totally opposite way. And so then when I come to you with an idea and I just say, yeah, we need to be able to save presets, it's like, yeah, but what does that mean? That it could mean so many different things. And um for someone in my position, one of the things that I found really sort of interesting and frustrating and educational about this project was that it really made me check in with what my assumptions were. Um, and so, like for example, I do quite a lot of work in film music, so I write music for films, and so very often I'm having conversations with like a director or a producer who knows exactly what they want, but then they're not necessarily musicians, and they don't necessarily have a musical language. So I, as like the provider of that service, sometimes find myself getting frustrated because I'm like, well, these are the words that you said, but
Mhm.
I know that that's not really necessarily what you mean. And so, you try and like navigate that process. And doing StageBox is probably, I think, the first time where I've been on the other side of that equation, where I'm just like, yeah, but can't we just make the sustain pedal work when you switch patches? And I've got this huge like baggage of assumptions that goes along behind that, where I'm just like, well, yeah, like, isn't that obvious? Like, why? What is there to discuss about that? And then when you actually start thinking through it, it's like, well, yeah, but what does that actually mean? Okay, well, sit down and draw like a kind of logic flowchart of if pedal down when this happens, if pedal up when this happens. Once this has happened, if pedal down, and so you get this really complex series of events happening that all have to be built in. Whereas in my mind, I'm just like, well, yeah, it should just work, shouldn't it? And that was a really interesting sort of check-in for me, which has kind of hopefully percolated through into my own relationships uh with clients of mine, where I'm like, okay, well, we've got to try and like navigate this in a way where nobody's making too many assumptions.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that was a super interesting part of the whole process for me, is really kind of um honing in on like my communication and exactly what I mean about whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that brings up a great point, which is that I think that a lot of clients get surprised by how low level and how specific things are. Like you said, that you come in with this knowledge of the software that you've used before, and there's this assumption that when you pull up a new project and you say, okay, I want to create a live performing stripped down host, that it comes with some of those assumptions, right? And
Totally, yeah, yeah.
and it doesn't,
Yeah.
which is maybe fortunate and maybe unfortunate, depending on your perspective, and
And
that
I think it just is what it is. I think it's the same with any kind of creative collaboration, and particularly when you're working with people that you haven't worked with before, you really are starting from scratch, really.
Mhm.
Um, and I think ultimately that's a good thing, because it really kind of forces you to really sort of fine tune all these different elements and parameters that you're talking about. Um, but yeah, it definitely took me a while to get into that headspace.
It is, and I think as a person, I always feel like I'm fairly new to software development, but I remember that first experience of opening Max MSP for the first time, and just feeling, as a person who used Ableton and have used these tools extensively, it just felt like, wow, you really have to like connect every single thing, right? That is definitely an experience, and it took me a long time to get into that. There's almost like a engineering type of brain or engineering type of thought process that goes into that. And I wish that I could find more ways that we could do that without clients needing to come so much and adjust so much into our world, where they could just be creative and free flowing and not need to, um, they don't need to be engineers, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like sometimes I feel a little bit too much like I need to bring you into our world a little bit for you to understand what that journey is like from a development perspective, right?
Yeah,
And
and I think that's where like you guys kind of come into your power in a way, because I think that if you haven't done this kind of thing before, which I hadn't, I think it's a relatively steep learning curve to just get into the headspace of, oh, okay, what language do we need to be speaking here?
mm,
Um, and I think unless you're unless you're kind of lucky enough to have some kind of background in that area and understand a bit about it, it's really I think it's really difficult to even understand what you're aiming for.
yeah,
Um, and I
yeah,
think like you being able to be like the in between of like, okay, here's your idea. Maybe can you flesh this out a bit more? And so you you've never said to me, you need to write it in this following way. But like I remember, once we'd actually got to a point where we had a broadly working product, and I wanted to send it out to a bunch of beta testers. And so I sent this version out, and then I had all this feedback come back, and it was just this big messy list, and I'd sort of tried to prioritize it a bit. Um, and then Rhiannon helped me like basically put together a Google Doc where I could discuss this list with Jules, and it was presented in a way where it's like, okay, here these are things like I can't even remember what the categories were now, but like this is a bug, this is a feature request, this is something that clearly should work but doesn't quite work yet. This is something that it would be great to have, but we're just not going to fit it in the scope of this project. And so this really messy list just became this really kind of simple, okay, that's what we're going to do. This is something that we're going to save for the future. Let's do that. And then we're kind of done. Um, but that was a super helpful process to go through with Rhiannon and to like get to the end point.
Yeah, I love that. A big shout out to Rhiannon and Jules and
Yeah.
who helped us do this project. And that that was that's so key, isn't it? Is that you get this feedback, and I think that that goes back to the main crux of what we try to do as an agency, which is that we try to be your guide in terms of, okay, I got this, I got a problem. Maybe the problem initially was I have a product idea. I don't know how to build it. I don't know, where to start with this. I don't know how much it's going to cost. And then as you go further on that journey, then it becomes, okay, I've got a whole bunch of feedback from users. I have no idea where to start with this or where to end with this. And I think that area as well is a key area to home in on, which is that as you journey through a product, there's this tendency that I see from a lot of clients where they feel a little bit of anxiety, like, oh, I need to build this in because this type of user isn't going to use it if I don't have this particular feature. And uh, that I think that there's this part that becomes ambiguous. There's this like middle ground where you had an initial vision, right, of what you wanted. And one thing that I'll say is that in every product that we've done, the initial vision and the final vision are never quite the same, right?
Right.
There's
Yeah.
a journey that happens there, and that's something that is so challenging to sometimes tell our customers is that, hey, this is a journey, right? Like I know that you think 100% in your mind that this is the thing that you want to be the outcome, but I promise you
Yeah.
that along the way there are going to be some segues and some
Yeah. Yeah.
iterations and some
Yeah.
things.
Totally.
But even in terms of bugs as well, bugs is another thing. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but that when it comes to fixing bugs, a lot of companies take kind of a triage type of approach, meaning that so you ship out this product, it works great, but then you have 10 users that come back with reporting that on this particular operating system or in this particular DAW that it doesn't work. Now that's a good sign that that's something that needs to be prioritized and fixed, right? And I find that there are a lot of people, or even where is one isolated case where it's one particular edge case. You have 999 users. They're perfectly satisfied with it. And there's this one use case in this one particular, ancient operating system on this ancient version of this doll that sometimes it crashes, when you hit this one particular parameter. And that from a investment perspective, that it's difficult uh, to show clients, hey, it might not be worth, it might be better just to give that client a refund rather than,
Yeah. Right.
sinking a whole bunch of money into investigating what this bug is, right? And
Yeah.
and that's not just something that's like an audio programmer thing. I mean,
That's
even
just software, isn't it? Yeah.
even the largest companies do
Yeah.
that. I would challenge to probably say even the Apples and the Microsofts of the world, do that where they have to
I'm certain they do.
take care of the big parts, and
Yeah.
then the smaller parts, the power use cases, the bugs that are kind of outliers, it becomes you know a call that you have to make of, okay, how much time can we really spend on really rounding this down and figuring this out. um,
So
One thing that I wanted to ask you is, did you, through that process of coming up with different features and some of them that you probably found that, they could be fulfilled easily and other ones that maybe you found like that were a little bit more complex than what you had anticipated at first. How did you find that process? Did you feel like, oh, this natural evolution of the way things happen? Did you find that there were frustrations in terms of there were things that you felt that you really wanted in there, but you just really had to hold off until a V2 release? What was that experience like?
Um, Broadly speaking, everything is where I kind of initially wanted it to be. There's a couple of things that sort of fell off the list a little bit in during the process, and then like through discussion, we were like, okay, well, just because of the sort of journey that we've taken, we're kind of in a place where that's gonna like derail some of these other things that we've been working on.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, there's a couple of things that I would have liked to have put in the product that are gonna hopefully be in a V2 of the product at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's always frustrating because you kind of think, well, this is the idea that we had, but like going back to what we were saying about like your development time being upfront or in the middle of the process, like it is a process. Um, and I've I mean I think I've hopefully just sort of embraced the fact that it's actually more like a creative process than I thought it was going to be in terms of those changes that happen along the way. Um, and in a way, I look at it a little bit like writing a piece of music where you have like this killer drum break or something. You're like, oh, it's amazing. That's going to be so good. And then you kind of get to the end of your song production, and that killer drum break just doesn't really fit anymore. But you're like, yeah, but that's this killer drum break, and I really want it to be in there. But just because of the nature of the journey that the whole song's taken, it's like, oh, it's just not going to happen. Maybe I can use it in another song. And so I feel like the process has been a little bit like that in that there are some things where along the way you're just like, oh, well, that just, kind of through nobody's fault, just the way that things develop. You're like, oh, well, we could do this, but we're going to have to backtrack quite a bit to get to that point.
Mm.
And then is it worth backtracking to get back to that point and then, delay the point where you have like a product that you can actually get in the world and find a bit about, how real people in the world are actually going to use it. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. It actually
So
brings
yeah,
up.
it
Yeah.
was there were I definitely had some frustrations, but I think um the frustrations were more to do with kind of my learning about the process of actually going from my crazy Miro board to something that you can buy.
Mhm.
And I think like if well, hopefully I'll you know do a project something like this again, and I think with that understanding you can be a bit more fluid in that sort of development curve as to, oh, where is this actually going to end up based on what we've learned along the way.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll say is that, like music making, I think that those feelings of not getting there quick enough, or sometimes those feelings of maybe feeling a little bit frustrated are quite normal to have.
Yeah,
And we get that sometimes with clients that say, well, why can't I just have like a really crazy 3D visualization of, Super Mario, climbing a tree the way that I want to? And sometimes the technology just doesn't facilitate doing that very easily. And it's tough. That's why I think that, like you said, the similarities that you make between audio software creation and music making are they do have a lot of parallels. I mean, when you do a website, for example, you're making a top 40 hits, you're making a top 40 pop song, right? It's
yeah,
like there's going
yeah,
to be a contact form, there's going to be some type of homepage. There are so many things that are givens that build out that structure in the same way that you in a song you would already know the tempo of the song and what type of drums that you would maybe use and and so on, and that it's just filling in the a different melody line almost.
Yeah.
Uh, it does bring up a question that came in the chat where they've asked, what's your view on the similarities between software developers and musicians? I feel like these two fields scratch similar itches in my brain.
Totally. And this is that's actually an amazing point because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about um, in this development process, which is that it does it scratches a lot of the same itches because so often um, in music production, but also in like musical jobs kind of slightly wider in the field. So like a lot of what I do as a musical director is problem solving. And it's like, oh, well, the artist really wants to do this, but we only have these instruments and this budget. And we've got to be able to put everything into carry-on cases, for example, you know. And it's like, okay, well, that's just a whole bunch of problems to solve. Um, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. I love having these like parameters where it's like, well, I know kind of what we're aiming for. Um, and in the process of getting there, we might end up with something slightly different than what we originally aimed for. But in doing that, we will have broadly achieved what the artist wants, and they'll be able to take it all as carry on, for example, you know. And so I love those kind of problems to solve. Um, and the software development is has a lot of a lot of similarities to that. It's like, oh, I'd love to have um I can't think of an example for StageBox in particular, but things where we're like, okay, well, I really want to have this level of flexibility, but I want to have a fixed one-page UI. That was actually something that Jules and I talked about a lot, and something that I thought about a lot in the UI process is that I was very adamant that I basically wanted like a one-page UI where you could see everything all at the same time. And so there's this trade-off between the simplicity of the one-page UI and having all the flexibility to add all the plugins that you could possibly want. And so inevitably you end up making a compromise where it's like, okay, well, you can add plugins in groups of three. You know, you can add your instrument, you can add three inserts, you can have three inserts in each send, and then you can have three inserts after those sends, and then you can have another three inserts as like a song-based signal processing. So that's 15 plugins, which is like a lot of plugins for a single keyboard sound, I think. Um, but it's not an infinite number of plugins, you know? And so, like we were saying earlier, there's going to be edge cases where people are going to want to use more than 15 plugins. And it's like, well, sorry, you can't. But you do have a really simple, easy to understand UI. And so these are all these problems where you're like, here's the endpoint I want to get to. Here are the parameters that I've got to work within. Go solve the problem, you know? Um,
Right.
and that is very similar to a lot of the work that I do in like live music production, but also quite similar to a lot of the work that you do in music production, where you're just like, okay, well, I need to get to, I want my bridge to be X number of bars long, but I really want it to build from here to here, but I really want to get to the chorus by here. They're all problems to solve, right? Um,
Right.
and and the intersection between that problem solving and your creative flow is I this kind of sounds kind of goofy, but like that's what makes an artist, right? It's like you've got your creative flow and all these things that you want to express, but fundamentally, in order to do that, it's a problem solving exercise.
Right.
Um, and and you might not think of it as a problem solving exercise, but even the even if you're just like playing a guitar, and oh, I've got this guitar line and I want to play this chord voicing and then go to this chord, but this voicing I want to go to is just really awkward to get to, but it's going to sound really good. That's a problem to solve. So I think I think that's exactly right. There's a lot of things during this process where I was thinking, this is actually like ticking a lot of the same boxes that I get really excited about, like music production and live show production.
Mm,
Um, but it's making
yeah.
some.
Yeah, and you bring up another great point, which will segue into another area of this problem of this problem solving space, which is that there are these external factors, just as what you get in music production of things like time, right? So there's like a deadline that you want to meet. You want to have this piece of software, this piece of music out within a reasonable amount of time. And of course, also the thing that I think so many people are so apprehensive to talk about, which is budget, which I actually love. I actually love opening up that discussion about budget because I love having transparent conversations when it comes to budget.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to open up the exact numbers of like what we agreed on to do this, but I think that one thing that would be interesting to discuss, and I think that one thing that gets brought up in so many discussions with clients, with software developers, just all around people who are looking to do any type of business pursuit is this idea of budget. And maybe I could open this up by asking the question, the budget that you came up with, or the budget that we came up with, how what determined for you whether that was high, low, just right? Were there certain factors there that helped you make that decision?
Yeah, totally. That's actually quite an easy one to answer. Because uh how I looked at it, how I yeah, no, I wish I'd had a chance to think about this before you asked the question, but I'll go for it anyway. How I tend to value things is based on, for me, like where I'm at in my career and the level of service that I can give to people and what that's worth.
I love
And
that.
so the budget that you gave me was broadly similar to the budget that I would give somebody else to do like you know, a reasonably in-depth film score, say. Um, I'm not talking like Hans Zimmer money, you know, but I'm not talking freebie budget movie. But like for where I'm at in my career right now, I kind of looked at it and was like, oh, that seems like a fair value proposition because that's what I would expect to get paid for my level of professionalism in my field for a relatively large scale project that I was taking on. And so in my mind, I was able to justify that. And this might sound like really kind of ego-y, but I was like, okay, well that means that I'm getting somebody in a different field of a similar level of professionalism to how I am in my field. That seemed like a fair exchange.
Hmm.
Um, I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I love the one particular word that you brought up, which is value, right? Which is that uh, you make you being in the position of your career where you are doing the things that you've done, that when a prospective client comes to you and you provide services for them, that has a certain level of value to it, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a little, maybe a little bit, a little bit different in terms of, okay, how does that translate with software? Luckily, it's a little bit easier in that we can translate that directly into a business case, and we can say, okay, Matt, you being the person you are, knowing X amount of having X amount of influence within your field, with your experience, that reason, if we took a benchmark of this many customers that were buying the product at this amount of money, then you could expect that this would generate this amount of revenue for you. Now, from there, now we can work backwards to, okay, now this product, uh, what what is the value of that, right? And not
Mm.
only in terms of a product, but also in terms of like what it does as a brand, what it does in terms of like launching your career. I've seen, we've done products for clients that have like launched them into whole different streams of, revenue and streams of
Yeah.
recognition, as like you're not just you're not just a person who's put out a product. You're like a taste maker. You're almost like a like a Michelin star chef who has now, cooked up your custom signature dish, right?
Mm.
That is now globally recognized. You can now enable other people when they want to capture your sound, they can now summon that using your plugin, right? That like
Right.
what's the
Yeah.
value of that? A lot
Yeah.
more, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love that. So yeah, I just put this out there because, like I said, I love having one thing that I found with all of the clients that we've had is that the conversation around budget, so many people get so intimidated by it and they get very nervous about it. Am I charging too much or too little? And one thing that I encourage other people that are providing any level of services is rather than thinking in terms of like per hour or like a time-based type of metric, really think about what the value of the thing that you're providing is, because the value of that software or of that thing, of that widget has some type of value within the market where a person in the right position will be able to take that and will be able to most importantly, be able to make a profit off of it as well. Because you get this reverse, you get this, you know, what I would call unproductive budget discussion in which uh, a person says, a person considers their value or what they're providing, but it leaves no room for the person who's taking that product and pushing it on to be able to profit off of it, right? And I
Yeah.
think that just leads to a win-lose type of scenario. And I think that's an unproductive way to view things. We want
Mm.
win-win scenarios where it's like, okay, the value is being stated and that's being provided, and that it also leaves a place where the person who is buying the service or buying the product can take it and bring it out into the market and has room to make a profit, and it's a very
Yeah.
successful profit if it goes really well.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is a difficult field, and it's something that I deal with all the time, kind of in the opposite direction. Um, and kind of as I've got older, I've sort of become more comfortable with the fact where um if I tell somebody that my services are worth X amount and they feel good about that, then that's great. That's going to work for both of us, and the sort of almost like mutual respect for that value means that I'm going to work really hard to provide that for them.
Right.
And if somebody says that they think I'm too expensive, then I might not do that project, but not based solely on the fact that they've told me that I'm too expensive. I'm just kind of like, oh well, this relationship of value proposition just isn't going to work because we've got different expectations as to what this project is going to entail or end up like. So
Yeah.
I, I've I think I've kind of got reasonably comfortable with the fact that sometimes I might not get a gig because I've outpriced it or whatever, but that's okay because that works out for both of us. Um,
Right.
and but it's a very sort of uh, it's a very touchy subject, but I like to think that if both party, one party can always not engage. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't think there have to be any hard feelings about that. It's like if you give me a budget that was double what I thought the value proposition was, I don't think I'd have been like, oh, those audio programmer guys, they're way too expensive because it's not that. It's just as a value proposition, it's not going to work in both of our interests. But
Right.
in this case, I felt like it worked in both our interests. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a
Exactly.
very it's a very difficult thing to quantify, and also in anything that is a kind of creative field or linked to a creative field, it's just really challenging, and it always has been for me in what I do. Um, and you just hope that you can kind of uh figure out something along the way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that when, when you start having that discussion and having an honest and transparent discussion, then what I find is that those become I think that there are a lot of people who think of these types of conversations as um, I'm sitting on as opposing forces, right? I think of them more as collaborative forces, in that when we so maybe somebody comes to me and they say, let to put the music analogy on here, because I think it might be easier for people outside software development to understand, which is that they may say, well, I would really love to do this thing, but my budget is only X. And then that gives us a an opportunity to say something like, well, if we do that, then we're not then we're going to have to not have live session players. We're going to have to do this all in the box,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because those live session players, they're going to have some sort of inherent cost to them, and that we aren't going to be able to make enough of a profit off of this in order to make the project feasible, right?
Totally.
So, yeah.
That's the thing. It's the opening of a conversation. That's the way I look at it. And I've been approached by people for music projects where uh, you know, uh, if somebody, what happens actually quite a lot with me is that somebody wants to license a piece of music that I've made for a video or a TV show or something. Um, and so they're like, oh, how much would it cost to license this? And so I tell them what I think is a reasonable fee. And then they come back and they're like, well, basically that fee is like our entire music budget.
Mm.
So I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's clearly not going to work. So then you can either say, oh, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. Or you can say, okay, well, you can use this piece of music and you can use it for this amount of time. Or we can come up with some kind of agreement that you can use it, but I'm going to retain some of the publishing, or all these different, there's a whole different bunch of ways to get to the end point. Um, but yeah, I hope that if I'm having that discussion with a client of mine, then it's more like it's a conversation starter rather than a, yep, this is going to cost this much, and unless you can pay that much, then we're not in business. It's more like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
how do we get to a point where we're both kind of getting what we want?
It's about all these factors, right? Like supply and demand.
Yeah.
The if you so famously, you may know this, that for the Super Bowl, that performers for the Super Bowl don't actually get paid to perform. They
Ah,
perform
I
for
didn't know that.
free. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know if their production po costs are actually paid for, or if it's really for free,
Yeah.
or what. But um, it's just that famously they don't get paid to perform because the level of exposure and supply and
Yeah.
demand. How many Super Bowls are there? There's only one Super Bowl, so
Yeah. Huh.
it's really about supply and demand, and that's why, okay, even if somebody said, okay, you should do this, you should license this piece of music for free. Well, what is it for? Well, what's the opportunity there, right?
Yeah. Totally.
That the outcome there. And it's if they can't if they can't emphasize or state what that value is, then then it's really a non-starter, isn't it? It's like you got to have something that you're giving back in return, because I think there are some people that come in bad faith and they want win-lose conversations when it comes to money, and I think that that is just not the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, totally.
so we had a question uh, from Shiva, who asks, when you talk about the value of a product in the world, do you think of it monetarily or more in the abstract? Maybe I could put that question to you. Do you think of it more in terms of like what's the monetary value of this piece of music, or do you think of it more in abstract terms, like where could this get me? What's the
Yeah.
opportunity there?
That's a really good question. And right now I don't have a totally solid answer because I'm still kind of feeling my way around that. But like when we first started talking about budget for StageBox, I basically did, I had a very kind of back of envelope calculation type of idea where I was like, okay, well, if I sell it for around $100, I'm going to need to sell X number of copies to make the investment back, at which point, hopefully, it starts making a profit. And that didn't seem like a totally unreasonable number to me.
Right.
Time will tell. Uh, but it wasn't, it didn't seem completely out of the realms of possibility. So there's that side of it, which is literally like the financial, will I make my investment back? But then the other side of it for me, personally, is that because this is used in a field in which I work, I can start, rolling that out, and having a product like that gives me a slightly different relationship with my clients. Um, Now, I'm not suggesting that just, but I don't want to have the investment of StageBox only be utilized by the gigs that I'm doing. But in a weird way, that is actually also quite a big part of it, because um, in providing the like overall MD service that I might do for an artist, any part of that equation where it's like, here's a solution to a problem that exists. And by making this product, I've in some way solved part of one of those problems that definitely exists, or at least, within the quite sort of specific field that I work in. So that also adds into the like value prospect of it. Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely a balance of the two, and I think the importance of either side of that balance is going to change as you go on. Because at some point, 6 months down the line, I might be, oh, this is great. We recouped. It's all good. Or I might be, huh, well, I better start putting some more value on having this product for my own use. And the truth is that I think it's impossible to know. Um, Particularly when you're entering into a market that has other solutions. They're just not your solution. So um I guess this is a similar sort of analogy to if you're making like an audio plugin. There's loads of audio plugins, but everyone's got their own slight different slant on it. And you hope that your own slant on it is going to appeal to more people than somebody else's slant on it. And that's the same with StageBox, like StageBox at its core isn't doing anything that can't currently be done in terms of there's programs out there where you can host your VSTs and audio units and go and play a gig. The difference that I'm bringing to it is the ease that process, the getting from nothing to going playing your gig, at least I hope in my mind, is considerably more straightforward using StageBox than using other things that are on the market. And so the hope is that you convince enough people that that ease of use transition is a big enough value proposition that they're going to buy your version of your solution to this problem rather than somebody else's solution to this problem. Um, and the honest truth is that you just don't know until you're 6 months or a year down the line and you've either recouped or you haven't. Um, so there's definitely an element of the gamble about it. But I hope it's a reasonably well informed gamble. Like, I didn't go into it I didn't go into it with zero research, you know. Um, could I have done more research? Yes, but as we discussed earlier, the more research you do, the more money and time you spend, which could be put towards actually making the thing that you want to make. Um, so yeah, to condense all that very long rambling answer, I think for me right now, it's kind of 50-50. Like the literally like recouping the investment versus the value in the world that the product might bring. Um, but I suspect that 50-50 might do this over the next 6 months.
Hmm. How about as a provider of a service, how do you consider that? Do you concentrate more on the monetary or do you concentrate on the abstract, or is it a combination of both of those again?
Um, I mean, I think it is still a combination. I mean, I like to think in terms of provider of service, I'd like to think it's more kind of the abstract side of it, where I'm like, well, I think this is a area in the market where there's room for improvement, and I would like to provide that service. And part of that is because I am one of those users. So like I want to be able to have that version of the software that does these things. And I have a like little test rig on the side here where I've got my DAW over here, but I've got a MIDI controller with a StageBox laptop that just has a bunch of keyboard sounds that I have off to the side that I can play at any time, and it's not linked to my door. It just it's routed to my speakers all the time, and it's been really fantastic. Now,
Mhm.
there's obviously different ways to do that. I could go and buy a Nord stage and put my Nord stage over here and play it, but just because I am who I am, I want this specific piano sound and this specific Rhodes emulation and this specific B3 or whatever.
Mhm.
And I've really loved having that just sitting here and it exists and I play it all the time. And so that is a whole value to me personally that is completely outside of the investment recoup equation of things.
But
Um,
what I meant was, as a person who licenses and creates music, how do you, when you're in a
oh,
conversation
sorry.
with
Okay.
your clients,
Yeah, yeah.
how do you consider whether a deal is works for you? Do you concentrate more on the monetary value or more on the
Yeah,
abstract?
right. I it's very much, yeah, I think it's probably 50-50. Um, I've definitely taken a lot of gigs over the years that pay no money, and I've definitely taken some gigs that make up for that. Um, and I think it's what we were saying about the value proposition. If somebody approaches me to do something which is literally free, then I've got to want to do it, you know, either because it's a super interesting creative project, um, or maybe it's like uh, a genre of music that I don't get to work in very often, and this enables me to do that. So those things are value. Um, and so for a project like that, then yeah, it's definitely about the kind of more ethereal side of it. But we all have rent and mortgages to pay. And so the balance of that is that like over a year, then I've got to take on some projects that make up for that.
Mhm.
But on a project per project basis, um, it's I'm super happy to, and I have done frequently done gigs for free as long as there's some kind of value in that for me. And that might might not be value in a future monetary sense of like exposure at the Super Bowl. It might just be, oh, this sounds really fun, so I'll do it. That's great. I love having fun.
That's great. That's great. Going back to what you were saying about the risk reward uh, consideration, that you knew that coming into this was going to be a certain amount of risk. What was it that was there a particular moment or a particular area that you could look at where you said, okay, I'm going to definitely go for this. I think that is worth the risk.
Um, yeah, that's a tricky one. Um, I think it was like a combination of just like really wanting to do the project because it's something that I haven't done before, and knowing that at the end of it, I would actually have this really cool thing that would exist. Um, that was like quite a big draw to it. So even taking the sort of risk into account, it wasn't the risk of I'm going to invest all this money and I might end up with nothing. You know, it's like I'm going to invest this money, but I'm going to end up with this thing that I personally really want. Um, and if some other people also want that, then I'm going to make some of that money back, and that's great. You know, but it it's not like it's not a risk of like betting on a horse where it's like, oh, well, I'm going to put my $10 down and now I've lost $10. It's like, no, I'm going to put my X, well, slightly more than $10 down, but I'm going to end up with this thing, you know? So, yeah, I don't think there was a particular point. It was more just like the culmination of over quite a long period of time, I've really wanted to make a product like this because it doesn't really exist. Um, and so I was like, oh, well, here's the opportunity. Like I've been put in touch with these people. There's some really amazing developers that are on board. I've got an opportunity to actually make the thing that I've always really wanted to make. Yeah, there's a bit of a risk involved, but I am actually going to end up with this thing, you know? So yeah, that kind of made it feel pretty good to me.
Uh, do you feel that there is a value, or maybe I should ask you in a more open-ended way, what do you feel is the value of being able to, on your website or in your bio or just in the way that you communicate with the world, be able to say, I created this piece of software, or I made this a reality. What's the value of that to you?
You know what, to be honest, I really don't know right now. Um, I think it will, and I'm a little bit cynical from the point of view that I feel like people are often very kind of um one track minded about what they kind of want to see in your bio. So like if somebody's asking me to write a film score, I don't think they care that I've made a piece of software, you know? So
Yeah.
um like I yeah, that's a really interesting question actually, and I haven't thought about it that much. And I've thought about it in terms of like in my role as a live show MD, that's got a bit more of a like link up. It's like, yeah, I can do this. I've also made this thing that might be really useful for your specific show for the following reasons. That definitely has a value added to it. Um, but at the same time, that it's usually like it's usually a tour manager that might be getting in touch with me to do an MD show,
Mm.
and they probably don't care. um,
Right.
I think it would add value once you're like actually kind of on the ground and you're actually working through these problems that happen in that situation, and StageBox might be part of the solution for that. But in a way, that just makes my job easier, you know?
Mhm.
Um, in terms of my sort of music production side of things, I don't know. I think like some people are interested in that, but like I say, I think a lot of people just want to. It, in some ways, I think people are like put off when they see you do too many things. They're just like, well, why would I get the film composer who's running a software project on the side? You know.
Right.
Uh, for me, I've always found it like super interesting because I in my experience those are yeah, sometimes those are the more fascinating people to work with. This I'll do a slight aside. There's this guy, and I'm blanking on his name. I think his name's Andy Gray, but he's a movie composer, and I'd watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos about him talking about his very impressive studio setup and all these projects that he's doing, and he's really into the tech gear and how it's all his studio is all fantastically linked together. It's all wonderful. And at the same time, I was getting quite into woodwork, and so I was looking for um, different ways to joint two pieces of wood. Million different ways to joint two pieces of wood. But I found this YouTube channel, which was a guy who was showing you how to do this particular joint, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what I want to do. This is great." And so I started following this guy, and the long story short is that it's the same guy, but in his woodworking videos, you never saw his face. You just
Wow.
heard his voice. And I'm listening to this thing, and I'm like, man, that voice sounds really familiar. I've heard it before. And then there's this one video where he does like a tour of his wood workshop. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. That's like the A-list film composer who's also doing, this really high-end furniture and has the time to make a YouTube channel about it, you know?
That's
Um,
amazing.
but he like the two worlds never, there's never anything about the only thing about his woodworking on his music production site is the fact that he's got really beautiful studio furniture that he clearly made himself, but he never says that. But that
That's-
I just find that super fascinating. But I also can see that for some people that would almost be a turn off. because they're like, no, I want the guy that just spends 99.9% of his time writing music.
Right,
Like,
right.
I don't want the guy that's spending half of his time making quality furniture. I want that guy, but maybe other people don't. I don't know. So yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to know.
Yeah, I think that that's so interesting that you say that. And I asked that question, not really knowing the answer to that question. One thing that has been interesting to see from other clients has been the way that the product, once they've come out with the product, that it's changed them or changed their trajectory. And one thing that I've seen, maybe looking a little bit from the outside, has been that, so I can understand the conversation about film composing and woodworking. Those are two kind of disparate fields. I think that one thing that's interesting about uh, creating a piece of audio software and being a audio, musician, musical director, is that I wonder, and I'd love to have a conversation a little while from now to see if this is your experience, but I wonder if it's going to have an effect on your career as a musical director because you're, from my perspective, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this or completely off base. It's like now you've gone from, okay, we're using pieces of software that other people have created for us and we've purposed it for our needs, right? To now I almost feel like you have a wider view now of the needs of performers and what they like to see and how they like to see things and what musical directors like. And so to me, I'm almost wondering, will this will this introduce new conversations for you in terms of your role as a music director, and then how StageBox helped you realize some of those things and other things that you would like to see as a musical director or as a person that knows a lot about touring with artists, knows a lot about um, being on the road and performer needs and things like that. So not necessarily making a prediction, but I'm wondering if it's more of curiosity, wondering if those are the types of conversations
Yeah, no,
that may occur.
it's definitely on my mind. I mean, the one of the uh one of the like wider scopes when I started thinking about Stagebox was I actually had like a much bigger, grander idea as to what I wanted to do. Um, and when I started looking at the back of the envelope for numbers for that, that was just a scary proposition. And so I was like, okay, well, I've got to start somewhere. And so Stagebox is hopefully the first part of a kind of larger system, which I'd love to be able to develop at some point in the future, which is broadly to do with how live shows are run and how different elements of that live show can integrate with each other or not integrate with each other, which is also super important. But that's that's a whole other thing. So yeah, so right from the beginning, I kind of I'd really love it to be more than Stagebox. Um, and this is kind of like my toe in the water of um like, can I do it? Do other people agree with what I think is a good way to do it? And that's a, you know, that's a huge thing. And do enough of those people agree that I can, you know, to be harsh about it, recoup and make something else? Um, because you know, like we were saying about how I use Logic Pro, I have this idea of, you know, based on the live shows that I've been a part of, how the most efficient, most effective way to solve a whole bunch of problems. Um, but the reality is that I work in a particular, uh, not necessarily particular genre, but a particular like uh, part of the live music industry, and there are all these other parts around it that may want to do things totally differently. So my solution to a problem is great for me, but I need to be able to convince enough other people that that's a solution to their problem as well, in order to expand this out to the wonderful huge thing that I'd love it to be. So yeah, the short answer is those conversations have and will definitely happen.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. If I was of course, if this I'm going to say when rather than if when StageBox becomes successful,
Yeah,
that um that we'd have the opportunity to build those that constellation of applications with you. But one thing that would be very fascinating and also be very rewarding to me is I would I would love to see if there was a company that specialized in in this particular area, and they saw that what you did with StageBox, and they said, we need to talk to Matt, and we need to get his input and like do this as a collaboration effort to for these things that we want to do within this particular scene or for our particular products. I think,
that would
yeah,
be a lot of fun.
I could see that happening. You know,
Yeah,
if I was sitting on the other side of the fence as the CEO of a company that specialized in uh, live music and live performance applications, and I was looking for the next thing, I'd be looking at this conversation thinking, I need to reach out to Matt and see like what are we missing out on? What's the next level of how we can revolutionize the way that we're doing this.
let's
So
put it out there.
let's put it out there. I'm putting it out there into the world
Yeah, yeah,
right now for you.
yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is definitely happening and has happened over the last, 15, 20 years that I've been working in this field is that all the ideas get iterated way faster and there's way less time to do everything. And so the development of all of these kinds of tools and, also, in like video projection, video mapping, lighting design, all of the tools that are in those areas are just going to have to become faster and better.
Right.
Um, and uh, I'd love to be a part of that somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I think you will. I don't- do you know Ben Supper?
I do.
Yes, yes. So Ben says, prediction is that launching StageBox is likely to give him customers, which will then inform his subsequent direction in ways he never anticipated. So that's
Yeah.
Ben has said.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben.
Uh, let's. I'm conscious that starting to run on 2 hours here in a conversation. I feel like I've been talking for maybe 10 minutes. One thing that I wanted to ask you about was a little bit more about just walking through that development process of that collaboration. So you got a prototype. So you got an initial build, an initial prototype of some of the first things that you were looking for. I was wondering what your reaction was. Was it what you expected? Was it a lot more raw than what you were anticipating? How did you feel about the first result that you received?
Um, I think I felt pretty good about it. And I think it was probably, I don't know, I feel like we were like a month in ish, maybe 5 weeks.
Yeah,
Um, to get from like nothing to something that I could open up on my computer and do something with. Um, and I think I actually thought that was pretty impressive. Um, but it's funny because I remember you saying to me, you were kind of like, it's all looking a bit raw at the moment, and this is just, and I was like, no, I think this is great, and it was very sort of like wireframe UI and lots of things not there, but it was a standalone app that I could open on my computer and run a plugin in, and I thought that was like deeply exciting.
yeah, yeah. That
So
is
for
exciting.
me, I thought that was great. Um, and then I think yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the development kind of ramped up to this point where I was like, oh, great, something's happening. And then it kind of plateaus for a bit. And you're like, what's happening? What's it? And then it kind of does this. And so it sort of in fits and starts, you get these like step developments. Um, and then to be honest, the one part of the development that I wasn't really aware of, and I'm still not totally sure I understand the rationale for this, but you'll be able to explain, is that for a long time we were like very quickly iterating a whole bunch of ideas and adding things in and moving stuff around, and then kind of got to a point where it was like, okay, this is feeling really good now. Um, and then basically had to like almost build it again in that format. Um, and I guess there's like a difference between this kind of way of developing something so that you can very quickly change things and iterate on ideas, but then you've got to like almost render is the wrong word, but like solidify that in a way that makes it a bit more of a actual stable application. Um,
Hmm.
and that was part of the process that I didn't really know existed or understand about. So that again, that was kind of a learning process for me because I was like, well, hang on, I thought we just like got to this point where we're like kind of so close to it being done, but
Hmm.
now it feels like we're kind of going backwards again. And in that process, some of the things that worked sort of stopped working because it's been built a different way. And then yeah, so that I guess that was like two-thirds of the way through, I think. Um, and then as we got to the actual end point of it, um, then it was more stuff like yeah, I'm just trying to remember like the end process was more to do with kind of integrating feedback from the beta testing in a way that like achieved all of those things without breaking stuff that we'd done before, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and then and spending like from me personally spending just a huge amount of time like testing and retesting and retesting every single feature that's there and trying to break it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that was how the development arc looked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. One comparison that I make with people when it comes to creating a software product is that it's a bit like making a painting in that most artists, I guess there are some exceptions maybe, but for most artists, if you ask them to make a portrait, typically what you would see is that they would make a rough sketch of an outline of the very big pieces of, okay, this is roughly what the scene will look like, what, you know, it's very rare that you'll have somebody that will start with an eye and get the eye perfect before they move on to anything else. And so what happens is that over time is that you start out and sometimes that process is a lot like music creation. You're trying out different types of instruments, you're trying out different types of drums, seeing what works, seeing what vibes, right? And that through that you're kind of throwing paint all over the place in a way. And you're not writing the code necessarily as what they would call scalable as you would like it. You're just throwing it out there and you're just making it real, making it work for now. And then, with the promise that sometimes gets fulfilled and sometimes doesn't, many times does not, that you'll come back and you'll make it better when you get a chance or when you get to this stage of things. But yeah, that refactoring and really making it into a good, solid application that doesn't crash, and it isn't brittle, is definitely part of that process. And it's going back to that painting. It's that refinement, and then you find out that the hand position isn't quite right, so you gotta remake the hand, and that some certain things need to be adjusted, and now the scene needs to be bigger, and the ground needs to be higher and or lowered down, and so it's adjusting all of these things, and then because you adjusted one thing, now you got to adjust a different thing, and
Yeah.
these things become like an entanglement of almost virtual wires where
Mm.
things are connected into each other, and that you pull the connection from one wire, and then all of a sudden this thing way over here has broken now. Oh, why does that happen? That's not supposed to be connected to that thing. And So it's just making it all a nice, neat package. Same thing with when you get things ready for delivery or for release. There's this kind of final packaging, and there's this, they have that saying that the final 10, the last 10% is actually the 90. You have the 90-10 rule. You have 90%, and then the last 10% is like the other 90%. And I think that that applies very much to software. You have like things like you were talking about, like the user license agreement. You have
Yeah.
the about box and what goes in there, the design of all things, the website, all of these other things that are out there in the peripheral that need to be straightened out before
Yeah.
a product can be released. So
Yeah. Totally.
that's pretty much it. It's just the normal part of the process where
Yeah.
you go from this thing being what they would call a sandboxed prototype to being a real product that stands alongside other products.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Just to loop back to something that we were talking about and sort of related to that. So I'm really interested by your view of what the future of AI might mean for people that are actually coding. So my take on it, just very briefly, when I started talking to people about making this, they're like, "Oh, I mean, surely you can get AI to do something like that." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I probably can, but I would have to employ a coder to prompt an AI to make code because I don't even know what I'm asking for, you know? And so like how do you think that might develop? Do you think it's going to be the case that actually, you know, people like in your development team are safe because it's so sort of bespoke? Or would it be that those developers would start using AI tools to do some of the coding schlep that maybe they don't want to do? Like, is that a viable prospect?
I think it's a little bit of both. That I think in the future you may be able to make tools more or less from start to finish, simple tools that are generic use cases. But I think that even in even in our way of describing things to each other or to a computer, the way that that interface or that person on the other side interprets what you're saying has so much effect on what the outcome is, right?
Mm.
And I don't know if you've ever tried AI generated art, but I have. I've played around with it, and I can never really get around to a vision that the thing that's ended up on the screen is anything remotely close to what I have in my mind,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Because the way that we describe it the, is so is so difficult, and it's so intertwined with our culture, with our experiences, with our everything that we that it I don't know that a computer is really going to ever truly understand what we mean. You know, like if we say we want um, yeah, uh, something that sounds like a like a ricochet, right? Like that can mean a lot of different
Yeah, right.
things, right? And even if you try to describe it to its finest detail, that in my experience with AI, it just never ends up anything remotely close. Sometimes you get results where you feel like, oh wow, that's really interesting and that's really
Yeah,
out of the box, and I'd like to take that and I'd like to use that. But in terms of AI assistance, I mean, many developers are already using it. I use it, sometimes, uh, and I think that it's very handy for that. It can be powerful in the hands of people that know what the output is supposed to look like,
right.
and
Yeah,
I think that that's really where it's powerful is that you you have an idea of is supposed to what the output is supposed to look like and what these systems are supposed to, um, you know, because if otherwise what happens is that you could probably loosely cobble things together and get something that kind of halfway works, but I think you'll find that it's always going to be breaking. I mean, even in the web world, they have this where, and with, like I said, with the web world, you have so many knowns, so many foundations, it's foundational layers of, and so much research. I mean, there's loads of websites,
Mm.
loads of data on the things that work and things that don't work, and AI can't
Yeah.
even seem to get that really
Mm.
right. But uh, so I think it'll be an assistive tool, but by its nature, I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself an AI expert, but I have studied AI, and that you always get this, you always get it to this point where it's pretty good or decently good, but it's not there, you
Yeah.
know. And the fact that it's not there just um, isn't going to be satisfiable to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
especially for a complex piece of, now we're talking, what I was talking about was like, okay, maybe you can make like a generic, multi-effect plugin that from beginning to end, you know. But when you're talking about something that like what you're discussing, okay, this needs to be a a plugin host that is able to load different types of plugin formats, VST3, AU, AAX formats. It's supposed to be able to scale those in the right way. It's supposed to be, um, and then you have all of these considerations, all of those discussions that you had with Jules, for example, where you were talking about different ways that you wanted the interface to look or for the behavior to act that would be very, I think that you would find that those would be very challenging to describe to an AI and for the AI to give you the appropriate output for that.
Yeah.
And I think
Totally.
I really think that that's what we're always going to come out with, whether it's video generation, whether it's music generation. It'd be like, well, yeah, it's cool, but I think that you know people love, the other thing is that people love the human interaction and the human the the act of creating. Uh, I think is very satisfying to us. Like why? Okay, we know um, that AI can generate entire songs, but pretty much anybody that I've spoken to says, wow, that's very novel, but in terms of like what I listen to day on Spotify, I don't want to listen to it's not satisfying to me to listen to AI
Yeah.
generated music. Well, why is that? I don't know. I don't exactly know the reason why.
I think part of it, particularly with music, is that so much of what people listen to is because they know something about the artist that's making it. And
Right.
so even if you hear something by somebody that you don't know, quite often, even if you just look at what the name is, you're like, oh, I've now got an association with that name. So I'll go and find some other stuff by that person. And then you find out some stuff about that person. And then that kind of, the more you find out, quite often it just like deepens your relationship with that music because you basically turn into a fan. And I think it, or I mean, maybe I'm being naive in thinking this, but like at the moment, I'm kind of like, you know what? I think we're going to be okay for a while, at least. Um,
Right.
because I don't think people are going to become fans of an AI.
Yeah.
You become a fan of a person, of a personality, because there is that like relationship there. And like you're saying, I think particularly with any kind of creative endeavor, um, unless it's something like draw me 300 red squares in the shape of a big red square. It's like, okay, cool. If you've got something like super specific where it's just like, oh, I just need somebody to do that, great, maybe that's an AI tool. But if you're actually looking to have some kind of creative endeavor and like learn stuff by the process of doing it, um, I'm hoping that our jobs are going to be safe for a while yet.
Yeah, I think that what we'll find is that there will be things like one thing that I would love just as a person who creates, but I can play piano decently, I can play drums decently, but I can't really play the guitar. So I would love to be able to conjure up something that, or get something generated that would fit the description of what type of guitar loop or what type of guitar part that I would want to fit, but I don't want it to create the song for me. I just want
Yeah.
it to augment into that really small piece of
Yeah,
the thing
right.
that I'm not able to do myself. And I think another thing is that we people who really advocate for this AI, that AI is really going to take over these things, have a utilitarian type of view of a lot of things. It's like, well, why do we drive different types of cars, right? Why do we drive the cars that we drive or choose what to drive? Why do we wear what we wear? Why don't we all just wear black t-shirts or just wear the same outfits? It's like it doesn't because everything that we do is more than just utility. It's not just about, covering up my body. It's also about, how I identify as a person. And certain people that might be to more of an extent, and some to less. Why do I choose to drive the type of car that I drive? Okay, it's because maybe I like some of the values of the company that of the or that I identify with certain values of that company. Why do I drink the coffee that I drink? You know, there are so many things that tie us in, like you were saying with music as well. Well, we tie into things that we can identify with and that we resonate with, and that when you're talking about AI, it's like, well, there's nothing there. There's nothing it's not just about the notes, right? It's about everything. It's about the music video. It's about well, at least it used to be about the music video. But it's about all of these things that are tied together with our culture that makes us human. So, like you said, for those utilitarian types of tasks or uh, for those things that maybe help to fill in the blanks, I think that they can be very useful. And you know, the other thing is that you'll never go out of the box with AI as well. You'll always get some type of um, cheap imitation of something that's already been, right? So that ties into something that a couple people are saying here. So Ben says that a lot of the day-to-day creativity is derivative or repetitive. If I were to paraphrase this conversation, is that AI is a good peer or worker, but a terrible master. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Um, and Keith says people that use AI aren't learning or doing anything new is always a copy of a copy, no experimentation, no discovery.
Yeah.
Um, so Keith also says Hatsune Miku, I'm not sure who that is, has a following. Not really AI, but shows people will make fans of things they like and don't need to be people. Not quite sure what that means, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that we get into art, we get into cinema, we get into music because of our connection to it, our resonance with it, not because of the utility of it. And I
Mm.
think it'll have an effect, but it won't replace us. Yeah. And
Here's hoping.
yeah, as far as and as far as for the thing that we do, with the audio programmer with the agency, it's that people really want interpersonal relationships. They want, we like for example with a website, right? Like we're going to be rebuilding our website soon, and we've chosen an agency to do that. I really want somebody that I could come to and I could tell them my problems. I could tell them my challenges and the things that I want to do. And I want them to use their experience to help me navigate through those challenges and help me come out with an outcome that is based off of those interactions, right?
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it's that experience of that bonding and that that service, right? That feeling like, okay, I can come, I'm getting a service. It's like going to a restaurant. Like, why don't we just all use robots to carry out our food? And why aren't they served on paper plates? Well, it's because it's about the experience. It's not about just sustaining our bodies.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think we're all right.
Good.
So, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that I think that could be productive for this conversation?
Um, don't think so. I think we've
Yeah.
covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground as well. This has been fantastic, and
Yeah, it's been
yeah,
great
thank
to
you.
chat.
I think we've hit the record for the longest podcast that we've done. So we're getting towards Lex Friedman level.
Totally, yeah. It's great.
There. Ben made another great comment. So the bleeding edge into artificial is that we have with Instagram celebrities or boy bands, but Josh was putting human connection at the core. I hope he's right. I hope I'm right too.
I think you're right.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I think so. Hopefully we won't just become, robot consuming entities.
It's
I
all going
think
to be just fine.
Yeah, I think that certain companies and certain entities, they would love that. Like briefly segueing before we sign off, that one thing that I said a number of years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, was that I felt like major labels, that when you look in the 80s and 90s, that you had so much of a diversity of artists and of music and of creativity, right? And then sometime into the 2000s, it felt like that creativity I'm talking about, the pop music and the music we would typically hear on the radio. It felt like that dropped off and everything got very formulaic. And I
Mm.
felt like, well, that makes to me that makes sense, because if if I were a record label looking to capitalize my bottom line, I would want to have a universe where I could replace Madonna with Lady Gaga or with Beyonce, where I could write a song. So everything became very factory, almost factory driven, where, okay, we get a writer from here, they write a song, and that could be Justin Timberlake, or that could be Drake, or that could be whoever. We could just take artists and we could just pull them into this factory. Same thing with producers, where you just get this factory of
Yeah,
music making that's formulaic and so highly optimized as well. And that now what happens is that the power goes back to the labels and goes back to the companies rather than to the artists, because it's like, okay, you know, if you don't, if you try to go outside of those lines, it's like, whoa, what's happened here? It's,
yeah,
things have gotten thrown off, right?
yeah,
And that I think that there are certain entities that would love to have it where they could just generate, quick, throw a can of soup into the microwave, have a microwavable, replaceable, formulaic type of way that they could just disperse content, and that we would consume it and buy it, and that it's predictable, it's optimizable. I think that's that fight of creativity versus corporate machines, right? That
mhm,
and so I feel like you're going to have entities that are going to be trying to push the formulaic type of approach, and that you're going to have hopefully an uprising of new creators that want to fight against that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we're going for.
Yeah, it's definitely what we're going for. So I pray that that's the way that it goes.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, we'll sign off here. Matt, thank you so much for your insights and for sharing your experience with us. And
Thank
it's
you.
great to see StageBox become a reality.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally, totally.
yeah, for anybody who's
Thank
watching
you
the
for your
video.
help along the way.
Oh, I'm glad to help. I'm glad to help make it a reality and help have played a part of helping to take that vision and bring it to life. And big shout out to the team, Rihanna and Jules, Ches, who have all you been able to help make that vision a reality.
Totally.
Yeah, StageBox, grab it now. It's in link is in the video description below. Matt, where can people find out more about you?
My kind of musician website is mattrobertsonmusic.com. And that has got all of my like music projects and film projects on it. And then stageboxsoftware.com has got is kind of like the in-depth Stagebox website. And then the shop front for Stagebox is on traction.com. So that also has a bunch of information and tutorial videos and things like that.
Perfect. And if you would like to join our community, learn how to make your own audio software, be sure to come check us out on theaudioprogrammer.com. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you for everybody that joined in, and we will see you again next time.